In my own research history, one of the ways this cropped up was an unpleasant surprise. The term sociobiology had been raised in the 1970s concerning the evolution of social behavior among any organisms, and its application to humans had rapidly become a matter of contention among biologists, anthropologists, psychologists, and anyone else you can name. And by the 1980s, this was phrased more as human behavioral ecology, a somewhat more generalized term, and had lost none of its argumentative content. By the 1990s, we are talking now about something called evolutionary psychology, and yet again, it seemed more framed in contention rather than less. And since then, the discipline has, or the topic has fragmented and undergone any amount of politicizing, and in my opinion, is in extreme disarray, which is really unfortunate. And again, it always seemed to come down to those rather much older issues of if we discuss human socializing in terms of that single why of logistics and physicality and history, that we are negating some notion of its value, that we are taking something away from it. We are removing nuances that otherwise could only be addressed if we talk about them in some rather vague notion of the other why, of humans having some presence or some status that is metaphysically more important or more significant than some other creatures. Now, in this construction, in the way these are described, instead of saying superadded forces and instead of saying spirituality, we instead have a completely different stand in, which is typically culture. Typically, the idea that there's something about human cultural activity which really has shaken off a tie to our biological histories and our material form, even, and has become a superadded presence of some kind. And that debate, unfortunately, has become not a debate, but category error has crisscrossed yet again, and we end up with blither. And that is unfortunately the status of that topic today. We can also note that when I talk to students about activities of creatures and what behavior is, and I can ask them, I can say, are there components of our behavior that you consider to be non-physical? That these questions of logistic and historical, how did it come to be this way, why, don't apply. And I've been interested to note that the answers range all over, from students who say, no, I think our minds and emotions do have this kind of why that we can apply to it. And then other students who say, no, all of that is completely off the beam. None of that is physical. When I say the physical human, they say, okay, not what we think and not what we feel. Which raises the interesting question, which we can address gently in the class, of what on earth it is that the anatomy of our brains and our neurotransmitters and our hormones and things are doing if they are not having a causal impact on our behavior. But as you can see, the range of views on this continues to be both broad and in many cases on a personal level unconsidered until you put just a little bit of gentle pressure on it. And I venture to say that that is probably the case throughout academic discourse and general discourse as things stand.